currently we are seeing like a revolution. So revolution of course, Gen AI, ML. It's not like it's completely brand new, but we are seeing the acceleration piece of it, and that's amazing. Also, the fact that we don't often realize that 16% of the global population is somewhat having let's say they have a condition, they might be disabled, that hinders them from using technology, and that's a billion people. So I would say, like, if you look at the journey as such, if you look at the accessibility as a journey, we are in the beginning phases. We are kind of just leaving the start line. And we don't yet understand what are the options of how do we enable people more. So I think now that we have the tools, let's look at like Gen AI, and if we look at like tools that provide us with digitized speech, for example, we will experiment a lot, like upcoming years. But of course, we have had already the journey with machine learning, AI, and such that some of the work is already done. But I would say that for accessibility, to have a whole product and product line, and also match the regulatory requirements, that is still a long journey.
Hello and welcome to Tech Effect, the podcast where we interview industry experts and leaders to get their insight on the latest trends and topics in tech. I'm Josh from TestDevLab's marketing team, and today I'm joined by Ursula Koski. Ursula has over 28 years of experience in software development, cloud innovation, and digital innovation, so it's fair to say she knows her stuff. Ursula is currently the CTO for Nordics Partners at Amazon Web Services, where she works with partners, governments, and the European Commission to accelerate growth in the tech industry. She is also a staunch advocate of diversity and inclusion and is a human rights activist, believing technology is a true enabler of growth and social impact. Welcome to the podcast, Ursula.
Thank you for having me. Very nice to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. So you have quite an impressive journey through tech, and I know you're here for Riga Tech Week. Sharing some of your knowledge and experiences at TechChill and your journey through being a senior developer up to CTO where you are today. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell us more a bit about your journey and maybe some of your impressions of Riga, because I know this isn't your first time here.
So, hey, thank you for having me. Really nice to be here. And like you said, this is not my first time to Riga, and it won't be my last time to Riga, so definitely love it here. Maybe if I share like a quick intro on like who I am, what I do, and of course like career-wise, personality-wise. So
Very wonderful.
so my name is Ursula Koski. My pronouns are she and her. And very often when I introduce myself, I say I'm an outlier. So I'm an outlier in ways that my personal life or career hasn't been the most traditional one. So let's put it that way. So I have quite a long journey behind me. And of course, so I feel really grateful for having the opportunity to also grow and learn and see where the industry is going. And so I'm really grateful about the fact that I feel that I have a front row seat to follow how the technology is evolving. And currently we are seeing like a revolution. So revolution of course, Gen AI, ML. It's not like it's completely brand new, but we are seeing the acceleration piece of it. And that's amazing. Like I mentioned, not very traditional journey. So I also talk about on stage things like my family, my background. I've been in foster care for a big part of my life, and
wow.
I have a neurodiverse brain. So it can be a blessing or a curse depending on how you look at it. So, and I also talk about that. So how do you learn? How do you understand how your brain works? Do you see it as something that's holding you back, or is it something that you can use for your benefit to kind of accelerate your career and also like understand yourself better?
Yeah, it really is an honor to have you here. You are a very interesting and storied person. I like how you mentioned about AI, because I've seen a lot of people talking about how this year AI is coming into its own. It's really moving beyond, because a lot of people knew it back in the days as a chatbot or a chat feature, but now we're seeing it, they're trying to make it do autonomous tasks and really do a lot more and develop it. But before we dive into AI, could you share what sparked your interest in digital accessibility during your tech journey? How did you become such an advocate, and how do you put that advocacy to work in the real world?
So maybe if I start from the point that I wear kind of multiple hats, you could put it that way. So alongside my technical career, so I've been technical all my life. So I was very lucky, or even in school, that I realized that I really love tech, and I feel like it's something that I aspire to do, and I still aspire to do that. So every morning when I go to work, I'm like, amazing. It's like fantastic that you can do that. But at the same time, of course, having those challenges of how does my brain work? What is the benefit or what is the thing that's holding me back? So my why, if you look at the side of like what is specifically inspiring me to look at accessibility, is that because of that outlier position, like seeing that side of if you are not maybe considered always like the majority, and it can be things like female in tech, like as simple as that. Like very often going to school, it was me and the boys, and it's like Ursula and the boys. So how do you see yourself, and how do you kind of still believe that you are in the right place? Like this is actually a calling that you want to do, and I would say like also the side that I've been reinventing myself in many ways, and I had the freedom to do so. So I talk about LGBTQ rights, and the fact is I'm part of the rainbow family. So how do you do that in a professional context also, so that you share about yourself? Like how do you talk about it without becoming a caricature? Like how can you have your personal life part of your business life and have that openness? So I think openness is one piece definitely of my why. Um, Also, the fact that we don't often realize that 16% of the global population is somewhat having, let's say, they have a condition, they might be disabled, that hinders them from using technology. And that's a billion people. So, looking at the side of also the very commercial why is that do we want to kind of leave out billion people?
There's a whole market there
Yeah.
that you should be able to access your products, and if you don't make it so they can even access your products, then you're just missing out.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, like looking at the future, like of course, I've had a long career so far, but I also have in my family, I have a child who's transgender. And even though looking at from the LGBTQ side of um, the world is not always fair. So how do you actually level the playing field? How do you provide access to different things, medical care, and of course tools, technology tools? And that's kind of the inspiration, like having more level playing field, allowing everybody to thrive in their role, whatever they want to do, and in their life, and have access to the same tools, have access to, if it's travel they want to do. So I would say like fairness is maybe.
Fairness is a good one. So it's
Yep.
not just that commercial. So obviously there is a business incentive
Yep.
there, but it's also just about doing that right thing.
I would say so, and maybe experiencing when it's not always on your side. That let's say that you see that there might be things that you would be doing faster, learning faster, if you would have the support. And the fact is, I did get some support. So I got some support early on, which actually allowed me to accelerate my career, accelerate my journey, and also feel like I'm included at work. So I think that's really, really important part of it.
Oh, that's good. So pulling from, obviously you've had a lot of experience in this, and you at some point were at the forefront of it. As you said, it was Ursula and the guys. So you were there, and you've had this fantastic journey where you went into a male-dominated field. Obviously, there's some not so neurotypical stuff there, and you've still managed to progress all the way up to CTO and leading divisions and being a real expert in your field. So that gives you a good idea of the whole digital landscape. So I'm wondering if maybe from where you are now, from where you are then, what do you think might be the most pressing accessibility challenges today, and sort of where we are now compared to then? You have a really good sort of vision of how it's gone and where it's going.
I would say, like, if you look at the journey as such, if you look at the accessibility as a journey, we are in the beginning phases. We are kind of just leaving the start line. And we don't yet understand what are the options of how do we enable people more. So I think now that we have the tools, let's look at like Gen AI, and if we look at like tools that provide us with digitized speech, for example, we will experiment a lot, like upcoming years. But of course, we have had already the journey with machine learning, AI, and such that some of the work is already done. But I would say that for accessibility, to have a whole product and product line, and also match the regulatory requirements, that is still a long journey.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned AI, because leads on to my next question. So with this advent of AI and how it's rapidly developing now, it seems to be getting faster and faster every month. Maybe you can comment on how AI is currently being used to enhance digital accessibility, maybe share some concrete examples of maybe work you've done with AWS or anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do so. So maybe kind of that loops back to the fact that okay, there's a personal why, but of course there has to be a business why. So if you go to any senior leader and ask like, why should we do this? Why does this matter? So of course there's the segment of the customer segment of billion people who may need some accommodations. So basically expanded market share. And then of course the brand, how is the brand seen? Are we accessible? That's one piece. And also how do you reduce the risk? So if you look at the reduced risk, is your product safe for everybody or is it safe for just the majority? And that risk actually amounts to money. And in some cases, of course, extreme cases, you might see even loss of business. So it is significant portion. So one of the things I see happening right now is that we talk about accommodations. So we talk about accommodations at work, we talk about accommodations for customers. So how do you go beyond from what's kind of the reasonable, the minimum level of accommodations and provide better service? And I think that better service will be the key to the challenges in the future. So customers will gravitate towards those that will have the best customer service, the best customer satisfaction. And then, of course, if we look at where we are right now, like what we are seeing, the acceleration is huge. So acceleration-wise, we are seeing Gen AI used in so many cases. Just to mention a few, like what I've seen, of course, internally at AWS and also what we offer to our customers. So you know our Alexa product line. So when you call Alexa and say, hey, what do we have for dinner today? We already have added accessibility features or things that you can use as accessibility feature there. Of course, having that spoken, can you turn on the lights, please? So what is often overlooked is that you can also use it for, let's say you have autistic children and you would like them to be more autonomous. So maybe you have a fight each morning of, can you please like brush your teeth, put on pants and go to school. So you can actually create routines. And those routines are basically, you don't have to do it yourself. You can say like, hey, Alexa is asking you to, have you actually brushed your teeth? You can also confirm.
I use those routines myself. They're less friendly than brush your teeth and just wake up, leave the house.
Join the club, me too. So it's actually wonderful. Somebody's saying like, hey, you should be probably going already. So absolutely. But with kids also that there's not the added pressure of dad or mom saying like, hey, would you now please, like this is the 5th time. So it takes that pressure away. So it won't build a fight. So maybe that's like a basic example of what I've seen that is actually already in use. But let's take the other view, that kind of the acceleration view, is that what we are seeing is also like photorealistic vision that is now ramping up. So if you think about like a metaverse and think about like VR goggles and such, we are seeing products like, let's say in Finland, Varjo, they are developing glasses where you can actually teleport yourself to a site. And let's say that you're working for manufacturing, you might have that access so that you don't have to travel, so you can actually inspect things. And of course, if you have disabilities, such as let's say that you are bound to a wheelchair, that teleportation can be sometimes like an amazing feat. So having that possibility not to travel, you can actually have that access to different sites, different friends. And I think that will be what we see in the future. But what is the future like in, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, remains to be seen because of the speed.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned first with the Alexa and then moved on to how workers can use it, especially if they're disabled. But it also ties into the fact that when you build a truly accessible product, you're also not helping people with maybe a permanent disability, but people with temporary disabilities. There are aspects of people's lives where all of a sudden they can't do something, and those features can, really come into play, really help them out, even in the short term. So not only is it this 1 billion market you tap into, you're also reinforcing your sort of market share in this larger market, and AI is really helping develop that and increase sort of the opportunities and the ways we can expand on that. Like with Alexa, it started out, I believe the idea was to help people with vision impairment, and now it's a whole product that, as you mentioned, can now help people with maybe autistic kids set up routines. And once you start with an accessible product and you develop it and you make sure it works, there's a whole market of opportunities that it can lead to.
Absolutely. And maybe one thing to mention, if you look at accessibility and you look at usability, like where's the balance? So things can be usable for the majority of people, but is it accessible for everybody? Is it usable for everybody? And like you said, is it temporary? Like, have you hurt your leg? Are you actually using crutches? Are you sitting in a wheelchair as a temporary measure? So how do you accommodate that? And how do you have those tools in place? I think very critical. And also some things that we don't yet fully understand. So let's take like color blindness, for example. Did you know that there are 6 different color blindness in? So if you're colorblind, you can be that in 6 different ways.
I did not. I have a colorblind friend, and I didn't know that.
So let's say that you're looking at like things like stoplights. So you have your colors, but let's say that you can't see, you can't actually differentiate between the colors. What if you go to a place where the stoplights are in a different order? So let's say that they are when they can be horizontal or they can be vertical. And then you think like, which one is red? Which one is red? Is it red or green? So very simple example of it's not usable even though it's in front of you. So and it's not safe. So it adds risks, of course, to the people who are driving, other people around you. So I would say that there's a lot to gain in looking into just also how the user interfaces work. And of course, will we add things like spoken word, like poly type of things? Those definitely help.
Yeah, we're big on that at TestDevLab. We like to make sure everyone knows the difference between a usability testing and accessibility testing, because testing whether a product is usable is a whole different game to making sure your product is actually accessible, and not just making it accessible, but also meeting regulatory standards within that. I believe I've mentioned that you also work with a number of social advocacy groups, such as you work with TIVA, which is the IT board in Finland, I believe.
Yep.
And then here in Riga, you also have done some work with Riga Tech Girls. So how would you say these different communities are responding to these AI-powered tools and the accessibility solutions that come with them?
So I'm really happy to say that they are the front line. So what I see really in Finland also that they are advocating, they are talking about the tools, and not just the tools, but also the accessibility. And for example, in Finland, we have an initiative called Mimmit Koodaa, which is Women Who Code. And they have about 13,000 members, and
wow.
It's amazing. And you have people who really want to learn. They learn together, but they also educate together. So they build a whole community. I see the same thing with Riga Tech Girls, which is nice. So it's beautiful that we see that adoption of new technology. And I think one of the reasons is that they see also it as an enabler for having more equitable future.
No, that's a good point, and that's part of the reason you work with so many advocacy groups, and you push for this, and you work not just in Finland but also here in Riga. You lend a hand to help push all that. I wanted to also have a look at maybe some of the flip side, the challenges that come with these. So how do we ensure AI solutions don't inadvertently create new barriers for certain groups? Maybe what should companies look out for, and maybe you have some examples from the work you've done, because you have, again, a very impressive journey through tech. So is there anything maybe as we're implementing AI, as it goes at this rapid pace you've mentioned, where we need to make sure it's accessible and need to make sure it's not a barrier to any groups that want to get involved? And
Absolutely. And I would say like my colleagues tend to say I'm repeating myself, but I will repeat myself on this because I think it's so critical, and that is data. So if you look at the base data you have, so let's say that you're using base data to do any kind of machine learning, AI tools and such. How do you know that? Because data always has a bias because it's built by humans. So how do you test for data bias, for example? How do you understand the data bias? And how do you actually balance the data bias out? So what are the tools and technologies? And I would say that education piece is very, very critical for all the people who are working in the technology industry to understand that we can't fully mitigate the risk of having a data bias, but we can actually understand the bias, and then we have tools to work around it, understand it, and then maybe just bring it as a visible piece in the world to say, hey, this is what we learned. Sometimes it's very interesting to see what's happening in the data bias in different industries.
that's good. The data is very important, and we at TestDevLab, we're a big advocate for accessible software solutions. We have Quality Forge, and we have many pages on our blog talking about its importance and how it helps. And what we've noticed is with the upcoming advent of the enforcement of the European Accessibility Act, which will have a standardized approach to accessibility across all of the EU, so it doesn't matter if you're in France, Finland, Latvia, Germany, Italy, you have to follow the same rules. And this is a big thing for businesses in a benefit, because it means there's no individual rules by country now. It's just a blanket set of rules that everyone can follow to ensure their products are accessible. So when a company is developing their digital product or service, how can they ensure the AI solutions don't inadvertently, because we have the data, but there's any major things they can do to make sure they're using that data in a way that allows them to avoid biases?
So for the data science side, what we see and what is really critical piece is actually retraining also data scientists who might have worked for a long time already in machine learning and AI, but also understanding like what are the deviations? Why is it happening? Is it something that's actually missing? So for example, let's take an example of, do we have a good representation of different people from different cultures, different backgrounds when it comes to health data? And sometimes what you see is that we don't. And that poses a risk, because if there's something that might deviate when you use certain drugs, when you do certain treatments, that can be a life-threatening risk. And that is something to really put emphasis on. And of course, looking at a business, regardless if you're building like a phone or you're building like a gadget or like a sports gadget, does it work on all skin colors, for example? So how does it function? Of course, like the most typical case of how does like crash testing for cars. Like we know that the crash test dummies used to be pretty much like a standard male person size. And then we realized that actually women are more likely to die in car accidents because the tests were biased. So understanding the importance, doing the educational piece, understanding what technology allows us to do. If the data is either missing or if it's very much deviated, can we, for example, use synthetic data to place some data in there that we can actually correct that? Maybe not completely remove it, but correct what's happening in the background.
So it's very important to take that sort of step back, take a look at your data and think, maybe there's something I'm missing here. And then if you need it, you can synthesize data, you can develop data, and you need to make sure on all fronts that the data you're using is avoiding biases, but it does involve taking a step back to get that full picture. As you mentioned with the crash test dummies, someone had to take a step back and go, hang on a minute, more women are dying in car accidents. Why is that? Oh, it's because we're using male crash test dummies. Oh, let's switch this out. Let's see that. And it did obviously improve it. So you do need to take that step back.
And maybe one thing which is good to remember, that some of the ways that we test and look at the data also they can start with the manual process. So what we are seeing with different universities across Nordics and Baltics is that they are creating like this ethical framework of how do you look at the data, what is the data bias, what are the typical findings in the data bias side. And then it ramps up into maybe a framework, a product and such. So there are some ready-made products already, and I say this very carefully, in certain areas, and then there are probably products that we will soon see that will be launched. So I would say ramping up the frameworks, having those specialized partners who offer testing for accessibility, testing for data bias. It can be sometimes ready-made. So I was thinking like a good example of this would be, if you look at the AWS marketplace, and there's a lot of vendors there, and there are also ready-made products for certain areas. Like let's look at accessibility. And let's take a good example of like TPGI's Accessibility Resource Center. It's widely used in the US, and it actually adopts really nicely the regulatory framework they have. It's both on the public marketplace side, and also they have the US intelligence community marketplace that's offering it. And had an interesting conversation about it. So if you look at like the Central Intelligence Agency, they adopted the framework. They are using it for testing. And then the question like, why didn't you build your own? They said the quality is so good that we didn't want to start building our own. We wanted to adopt something that is doing it really, really well. And of course, the second part is that anything that is on the marketplace is tested heavily, it's security tested, it's vetted. So it's a trustworthy partner. So I would say that that is also one way of, if you're building something, do you have to build everything from scratch? So maybe you can use like accessibility tools, data bias tools, and get some like a head start on things.
Yeah, so I think that's also something we mentioned, setting yourself up from the get-go is what helps you really later on. It's a lot easier than going back on yourself, trying to rebuild stuff, trying to start from scratch when you're already really sort of deep in your software development cycle. And it's also really important with the data we're training on and building frameworks, especially when we're working with AI, because that needs data training. And if there's a bias in the data, it ends up in the tool. And if it ends up in the tool, then it might not be accessible.
Exactly.
So you also mentioned cybersecurity, and that's good because I did want to touch on that.
Yeah.
When you're working with so much data, cybersecurity is very important, and you are very well versed in cybersecurity. So to take a quick look at it, and given your expertise, what security considerations should we keep in mind when we're developing these AI-powered tools to keep that data safe?
So looking at the data of what you're using when you're building a tool or building a new application, of course, if you look at the cybersecurity side, if you're using public-facing data, something that is like widely available, if you're combining public-facing data, maybe with some private data, does it become, for example, personally identifiable data? So kind of keeping those regulatory sides in mind. But of course, once we move towards like confidential, restricted material, how do you build that feature around the data of how do we encrypt? Are we encrypting while it's moving? Are we encrypting while it's on disk? And that, I think, what is one of the really key benefits of using like AWS is that there are certain things that are already built in. Like once the data moves through the network, it is encrypted. So there are certain de facto standards, which helps you, of course, so you don't have to build everything from scratch. But of course, once you're building your application, how do you do penetration testing? Who does it for you? Who does quality assurance? What are the regulatory requirements that you actually do need to follow? Local laws also, because there are some deviations. Just in Nordics, you can see that in the bank segment. So understanding the industry and business-specific requirements is very, very critical.
Oh, that's good. And I will make a small tangent. And you talked about, obviously, AWS make sure everything's encrypted.
Yep.
Why is pen testing so? Because if someone's a small developer, maybe they're working on that. But why is making sure your data is like pen testing it and just really putting it through the ringer so important? AWS clearly puts this at the forefront of what they do. So what would you say like the critical reason for that?
So I would say I would take like the business risk side. I would look at the business risk and what are you doing? What is the biggest risk that you're mitigating? What is the promise that you're making, for example, to your customers? So let's say that you're building something that is in the area of Gen AI. Let's say that it's a public-facing tool. What is the data security and privacy requirements that you're fulfilling and also testing against that? And are you actually fulfilling your promise? So understanding business risk alongside with the technical risk. And of course, also not overshooting it. So of course, if you are building it in ways that it's the most resilient and most secure, what is the business risk? Why are you doing it? So also not going overboard with something that may not be the most critical piece. And of course, using the ready-made tools that you already have. So using the frameworks, like well-architected is a good example. There's the security pillar. And security pillar allows you to do also very much like a baseline testing and understanding like this is what we should be building if we are building quality products.
That's wonderful, and that's obviously why AWS takes it so seriously. I wanted to bring it back briefly to accessibility. So looking to the future, how can organizations better integrate accessible considerations into their AI development process? Because we touched already that with the CIA and everyone getting started with a good mindset and integrating it from the start is how you create a good product, how you don't have to go back on yourself, and how you're already sort of in the correct mindset to serve larger markets, make sure everyone can use your product, not just use it, but it is accessible. So in the future, how can the accessibility be sort of better integrated?
I would say that looking at the tools, like the testing tools that are already available, like understanding the de facto standard of what is accessibility when it comes to, let's say, your mobile applications, your computers. Let's say that you go to an airport, like what is the usability and accessibility of, let's say, automated gates when you go through them? If you can't see what's on the screen, is it usable? Is it accessible? So I would say the workflow of testing and understanding what's the baseline that we should be providing. And of course, understanding the different conditions that we are providing accessibility features on? Is it, for example, vision impaired? Or is it accessibility in ways that I might be disabled so that I can't even use my hands, but I would like to play games? How do you provide those tools that everybody can join in, use the products, and actually be a customer for that company that is building a great game? So testing, understanding the workflow, and I would say there's a lot of ground to cover still, because just looking at workflows, it might actually revert back to just usability. Think about like an e-commerce site. You're putting something in your basket and you're actually checking out your basket. And let's say that it stops at some point. Do you have tools that you see where it stops typically? Do you see that there's always a blocker somewhere? It might be a usability issue, but it also might be an accessibility issue, and also understanding which one it is, what should we provide, can we make it easier for the customers, while still keeping, let's say, the payment process secure. So we don't want to make it so easy that it actually creates a loophole which can be abused.
Yeah, that was also a good mention with the e-commerce store, because we did on our digital accessibility conference we ran last year, we did have one of our speakers did have a visual impairment, and he told us a story about how he was trying to buy a pair of boots from a popular brand on their online store, and he just couldn't access it. He couldn't make the purchase, and he had to, in the end, go to the store to get it. And obviously he really wanted these boots, and that's where he went to all that. But in a business world, a customer would just go somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you get service, where it's the better site or something. So definitely. And that is also why it's so critical to talk about maybe the harder side of business, not just the fairness. Like we all agree it's fair, but also there's a lot of business there. And of course you want to have that best customer experience.
Exactly. And that's just, again, one example of one lost sale, but you do that over a year, that's hundreds, potentially thousands of sales. And if you're selling more expensive goods, that is going to make a big dent on your end bottom line there.
And one thing to mention is that it doesn't really, if you have the testing tools in place, it doesn't really matter if you're bumping into a usability issue. That might mean that there's something going on when you're trying to put in your card numbers. For example, I bumped into a situation where I was trying to book tickets and just seats basically. And I had booked them, put them in my basket, and then I had just a small typo and the whole payment got cancelled.
Oh, wow.
But guess what? What happened is that the seats got still booked. So they are still locked. You can't have them. You don't have the tickets. And then you're kind of like, who do I call? Who will fix this? So the right testing tools in place and understanding how the flow goes, you would immediately see like, hey, there's a blocker that will repeat over and over again. It's not just Ursula who's seeing it, it's multiple people. Then we can investigate, is it accessibility, is it usability, what is the reason that it's happening?
No, that's also a good example. And I guess with these businesses, when they're looking at how they can implement AI tools into their business to make them more accessible and just enhance their business as a whole, are there any AI emerging technologies that you're particularly excited about or you think are going to have a really big impact over the next, AI is rapidly evolving, so maybe even just the next year?
So let's take an example of e-health. And I'm working with a partner who's actually looking at how does psychologists and psychiatrists work with customers. And one of the key things when they ask like, okay, you have a new customer coming in, you interview them, and you would have to say, are they depressed? And how does like AI, Gen AI play into this is that we know that there are patterns in speech, for example. And when the patterns emerge, you might say like, there's a likelihood that there's depression happening. And then you can actually ask more questions. So what we are seeing is that these tools provide you with the baseline of, hey, this might be happening. Of course, you have to have the approval from the customer that you can record and compare and such.
Especially in the European Union.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, you need to have a set of data, like where you're testing against, like who gives you the set of data. But what they're building is that they have the set of data, they have the approvals, and they're testing it out. And what they're seeing is that they are quite correct. So the testing is quite correct. They can say like there might be something happening which is depression, and this is cool. It's actually adds more tools to the medical professionals' toolbox. Will they always work? Is it always a good match? Maybe not, but it's an additional tool. So I would say I'm really excited to see what will happen in the upcoming year in the e-health side.
So then looking at it, when organizations are considering everything they need to do, for startups or maybe established businesses that are starting to explore AI, accessibility, and how they can combine them, do you have any sort of good golden rules they can follow?
I would say, looking at regardless if it's a startup or established business already, looking at the regulatory requirement side. So let's take like US as an example. So Department of Justice, they have the sections 752 and 508, and they have been kind of living entities of what's happening around us for accessibility, also inclusion, diversity, equity field. What are the mechanisms in place? So of course, follow the regulatory side. What are the requirements? How do you report on that? So what we saw also happening in the US, they added the reporting mechanisms there. How do you follow up? How do you have the correct reports? How do you understand how a product works and how have you designed it? And I would guess that now that we see the enforcement of the European Accessibility Act coming to force is that it will be a living entity and we will see more reporting mechanisms. So I would say regulatory side, definitely understanding the business risk, and then maybe implementing tools. So thinking about, do you want to build the whole testing tools yourself? Do you want to have different third-party engagement, doing quality assurance on that side? So maybe including partners there. And of course, understanding your customer better. So
a big one in business.
yes. And thinking about, like, somebody asked me, like, why is it important to have diverse teams, like diversity of mind? Because diversity of mind allows you to understand what is the
gives you sort of a larger database.
So I would say like diversity of mind allows you to also understand what are the different like shades of gray or different kinds
ways
nuances.
Of approaching things. Like it's like walking a mile in someone else's shoes. You only know it once you've been in their shoes and you can see the world from their viewpoint.
Absolutely. And I think that is so critical. So maybe also looking at through the lens of empathy, like if you're not experienced with the accessibility issues, maybe you should have people who can test from the point of view, like having that vision, having that first-hand experience too. So I would say like that is also one way of doing it. And of course, having the diverse teams allows you to grow a better business.
So always, as you mentioned, testing with those diverse teams, getting in those different shoes. That's a good way of just ensuring when you've launched that product, you've not missed any steps and covered a lot of what we've talked about today. And making sure you get those perspectives, that data, making your product truly accessible relies on that data, and it's best when it comes from such a diverse base and diverse teams. But so our listeners can learn more about you, the work you do, and maybe some of the initiatives you're involved in. Where can they sort of go to find that? Maybe there's some initiatives you want to mention, some of the work they've done.
Absolutely. And what I would love to do is kind of share a link list that there are initiatives across Nordics, Baltics, and of course initiatives like Women Who Code, Riga Tech Girls. So how do you find them? How do you engage? How do you partner with them? And of course, maybe we can talk about the regulatory side, having links for that. So just the reading material, that happy to share those.
No, that's wonderful. So we got everything we got for the business. They can see the regulation side, maybe some YCAG stuff, which is the standard a lot of people use. And then also the Riga Tech Girls and the Girls in Coding stuff. So if they want to get involved in initiatives, they can do that as well.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So we're coming to the end of our time. So thank you for sharing your insights with us, Ursula, your perspective from 20 years of experience, an incredibly interesting journey and an incredibly interesting life that doesn't necessarily follow the traditional route, goes a bit against the grain, and the challenges you've had to overcome being, Ursula and the boys, working with neurodivergence, joining that, discovering yourself and getting to where you are now as a CTO has been really interesting. And your social advocacy is also very inspiring. So thank you for sharing that with all our listeners today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, as I've mentioned, if you'd like to know more about Ursula or her initiatives, there will be some links she will be sharing so you can see the regulatory side as well as the social advocacy side if you want to get involved with anything she works with and make a big contribution to helping shape the world and encourage more women to get involved in tech. And if you'd like to know more about software testing and making top-notch quality products, you can check out TestDevLab, where we have white papers, blog articles, and of course this podcast. And you can find that all on the homepage. I'd like once again to thank Ursula for being here today, sharing her insights, and you, the audience, for listening to us today. And I'll see you in the next one.